Welcome back to Cinema Recaps. Today, I'm introducing an action, mystery, and sci-fi film from 2020 titled Boss Level. Spoiler alert ahead, so proceed with caution. Roy Pulver, a former Delta Force soldier, is now reliving the same day for the 139th time. He's trapped in a time loop, resetting each time he dies. After living this day countless times, Roy has memorized every event. Every morning at 7 a.m., a man breaks into his apartment and tries to kill him, along with the woman he spent the night with. Then, a helicopter with a gunner appears outside the window, firing until the apartment explodes. Roy knows exactly when and how to dodge. He jumps out the window, landing on a sand truck, a move he failed 22 times before getting it right. Next, he steals a car and drives off, evading two other assassins in a minivan. Roy didn't know their names, so he called them Pam and Esmeralda. These women chased him, shooting at him throughout the city. But Roy knew how to dodge them, as long as he stayed focused and remembered to avoid the bus. When he failed to dodge in time, the day reset and started over from the beginning. Only a few minor details changed with each loop, entirely dependent on what Roy chose to do, or forgot to do. Besides the assassin in his apartment, the helicopter, and Pam, there were other killers such as Guan Yin, who often killed him with a sword, Kaboom, a dwarf who strapped explosives to him, Smiley, who liked to kill him by impaling him and tying him to the back of a truck, the German twins, and a guy who looked a lot like him, so Roy called him Roy No. 2. Sometimes Roy managed to take down a few of them, but ultimately nothing changed. The others always found and killed him. Roy suspected that the key to everything lay with his ex-wife, but when he called her office, the person who answered was her boss, Colonel Clive Ventor, who informed him that she had died in an accident. Roy suspected Ventor had killed her, but unfortunately, he never survived long enough to find out why. On days when Roy dodged the bus and Pam, he reached Jake's diner, where he had to quickly grab a spot at the counter. Otherwise, the last spot would be taken by Dai Fang, a swordmaster whom Jake admired. Roy would sit, drinking heavily, and listening to Dave, the guy next to him, ramble about internal security and conspiracy theories. At exactly 12:47, the assassins found and killed him again. Right in the middle of the diner, Roy had never made it past this point, not even by a minute. If he didn't go to the diner, he'd be killed even sooner. He had tried every alternate route he could think of, but each time he was killed instantly by the assassins. Roy recalled the day before the time loop began. He had visited his ex-wife, Gemma Wells, at her workplace, Dino Laboratories, after she left him a message telling him to come by since the company was hiring. However, Gemma didn't seem interested in his resume or in rekindling their relationship after all this time apart. Instead, she started measuring him and taking hair samples, even pulling some hard enough to draw blood. Colonel Ventor and his bodyguard, Brett, watched them through a security camera. Roy asked Gemma about the strange machine she was working on, and she said it had the power to erase everything in space and time, even to destroy the planet if used improperly. Roy also brought up their son, who didn't know Roy was his father, and thought of him only as a family friend. Pleading for sympathy, Roy told Gemma that he could accept losing her when he chose his career over her, but he deserved a chance to be in his son's life. Their conversation was interrupted by Brett, who reminded Gemma that they were in a restricted area. Gemma mentioned she had a special arrangement with Ventor, but when Roy tried to hand over his resume, Brett said they weren't hiring, meaning Gemma had lied. Before Roy left, Gemma told him she had sent him a very important birthday gift and reminded him of the word Osiris. Meanwhile, Ventor wasn't pleased that Roy had seen and learned something about his experiment, so he ordered Brett to handle Roy by hiring random assassins instead of trained soldiers to avoid leaving any trace. Afterward, he called Gemma into his office to scold her for breaching security protocol by inviting Roy over. Later that night, Roy went to a bar and met a woman named Alice, a dental hygienist. She was just one of the women he spent the night with, and the bartender pointed out that Roy would never be happy with these one-night stands because he was always thinking of his ex-wife. While Alice was in the bathroom, Roy received a call from Gemma. She said she was about to do something risky and needed his help, but Ventor cut off the call before she could say more. Roy sensed the worry in Gemma's voice, but he still chose to go home with Alice instead of trying to reach out to her. While Roy and Alice were enjoying each other's company, Gemma took samples of Roy's hair and blood, placed them in a test tube, and inserted it into the machine she was working on. Seeing this through the security camera, Ventor believed Gemma was acting on her own and ordered Brett to track her down. That was Roy's last day living normally before the loop began, but now, recalling his conversation with Gemma, he realized he had never checked the birthday gift she sent him. Finally, he opened the package and found a book titled Iessa and Osiris, with a note from Gemma on the back cover that read, "Time waits for no one." So focused on the book, he forgot the steps he needed to take to avoid the assassins and died twice more before escaping with the book. By discovering a button in the car he often stole, Roy pressed it and the car accelerated, causing him to miss the exit to Jake's diner and end up instead in an underground mall in Atlanta. There he sat down to read the book Gemma left behind. Roy couldn't grasp how the story of Isa and Osiris related to his situation, but he stopped when he spotted his son, Joe, buying something from an older kid. Realizing that Joe was his only family left after Gemma's death, Roy followed him into an arcade where esports tournaments were taking place. Every time Roy got close to a screen, it glitched, but he didn't notice. He approached Joe, scolding him for skipping school and asking what he had bought. But Joe just showed him some trading cards, not anything illegal. Roy then invited him to lunch. As they left the building, Roy realized it was already 12:50, the latest he had survived since the loop began. Analyzing what he had done differently, Roy concluded he might have a tracking device on him, and the metal walls of the underground diner had shielded him. At that moment, the assassins appeared and opened fire on Roy. He shielded Joe with his body, sacrificing himself and telling him that he was his father. When the day reset, Roy asked the intruder in his apartment about the tracking device, but the intruder didn't reveal anything. Roy then went straight to the diner and into the bathroom to examine his body carefully, even reaching into difficult-to-access areas. But he still couldn't find the device. Remembering that Dave knew about these things, Roy asked him where he'd hide a tracking device, and Dave suggested it might be in his tooth. This triggered a memory for Roy about Alice, the dental hygienist, who once made him fall asleep in the dental chair while Brett was watching them. She had been part of the trap from the start. After grabbing more alcohol and a pair of pliers from Jake, Roy went into the bathroom with Dave and began pulling his own teeth until he found the tracking device, only to be killed immediately by Roy number 2. When the day reset, Roy confronted Alice, and she admitted that Brett had paid her to implant the device in him. After she left, Roy habitually went to Jake's diner, where he removed the tooth containing the tracker and took it to an abandoned building as bait. His plan worked as Pam showed up, but she refused to reveal who hired her, so Roy killed her with her own gun, which had once belonged to some demonic dictator. Roy knew Gemma had placed him in this time loop for some reason, but without being able to save her, everything felt pointless. Revenge was the only thing left, so he relished his newfound freedom after removing the tracker and went on to kill all the assassins who had been hunting him. Using a phone he took from Kaboom, Roy called Brett and promised he would find him and Venter. Roy then drove to the lab and tried breaking down the door with his car, only to crash into it and get shot by Brett afterward. A series of loops followed, during which Roy tried different plans to sneak into Dino Labs, including rigging bombs to cars and impersonating Roy number 2. Finally, he managed to get an ID card and get inside, but it took several attempts to learn how to avoid the guards and security cameras. Once he figured out how to conceal a weapon, the guards were no longer an issue, but his next challenge was Guan Yin, whose sword skills were too exceptional for Roy to counter with simple fighting moves. Sometimes Roy didn't die immediately from the sword wounds, and Venter would find him in time, delivering a long speech about his plan to reverse history before killing him. In one such encounter, Roy overheard the project name Osiris Spindle and realized 2 things. Ventor didn't know the machine had already been activated, and Gemma had intentionally put him in it so he could become Osiris and stop Ventor's plan. Empowered by the realization that Gemma still believed in him, Roy started a new series of loops with a fresh plan. After following his usual steps, including removing the tracking device in the diner bathroom, he approached Di Fang and asked her to teach him swordsmanship. Di Fang agreed to teach him, finding him intriguing. Roy trained with her over many loops until he became skilled enough to defeat her. Roy thanked Di Fang for her lessons. Then he snuck into Dino Labs once again. This time, he faces Guan Yin with a sword instead of a gun, easily blocking all her moves. Brett and Venter appear shortly afterward, but Roy quickly takes Brett down by driving his sword into his forehead. Brett and Venter appear shortly after, but Roy quickly takes Brett down by stabbing him in the forehead with his sword. Roy and Ventor begin a duel, and as Ventor reaches for his gun, Roy retrieves his sword and pins Ventor's hand to the floor. Roy explains that no one should play God and rewrite history. The past should remain unchanged for people to learn from it. Venter scoffs at this view, sarcastically remarking that such grand words come from an absent father, implying that Joe might be in danger. Hearing this, Roy becomes enraged and, after killing Ventor, quickly returns to the mall only to find he's too late. His son is dead. This has likely happened many times in the loops he's endured. As Roy struggles with the police, who prevent him from reaching Joe's body, a blinding light appears on the horizon. It's the apocalypse, just as Gemma had warned. Roy realizes that Gemma died because he abandoned her and didn't call back when she needed help, and now their son has been swept into this disaster as well. As the world was nearing its end, Roy felt there was nothing left worth doing, and he began each new loop in a state of apathy, letting the assassins kill him over and over again. However, one morning, a violent scene jolted him awake, and he decided to make use of the time he had left. Roy returned to the mall to pick up Joe, spending the entire day playing games and having lunch with his son. He did this in every loop until the world ended and the day reset once again. Roy wanted to tell Joe that he was his father, but he was too afraid to do so. By the 249th loop, Roy mentioned Gemma's work, and Joe revealed that he had talked to his mother that morning after she hadn't come home. This surprised Roy, as he had always thought she had died at night. Now, he began crafting a new plan to see if he could save her. After the day reset, Roy snuck into the lab and shot Ventor and Brett, demanding answers. Brett confessed that they had been trying to figure out what Gemma had done with the Osiris spindle, as it seemed she had sabotaged it, and now they couldn't control the chain reaction she had set off. Ventor realized that Roy was able to slip in because the spindle was active, meaning Gemma had made Roy the missing piece when monitoring through the security cameras. Roy discovered the exact time Gemma died, 14 minutes after he woke up. After shooting himself to reset the day, Roy decided to try to save Gemma, even though he only had 14 minutes to do it. As usual, he took down the first assassin, but this time, he changed his routine by leaping straight out the window into the helicopter. After kicking out the sniper, Roy threatened the pilot with a gun, demanding he fly him to Dino Labs as fast as possible. Once there, Roy took the sniper's machine gun, snuck into the building, and used it to take down every assassin waiting outside the door. From the pile of bodies, he grabbed an extra gun and Guan Yin's sword, shooting down all guards on his way to Gemma's lab, where she was being attacked by Brett. Without hesitation, Roy swiftly killed both Brett and Ventor in seconds and reunited with Gemma. She asked him how many attempts it had taken to reach her, and he lied, saying just one. But Gemma saw through it when Roy told her everything he knew about Joe. After assuring Gemma that Joe was safe and no assassins were after their son, Gemma explained that the spindle couldn't be stopped, only reset. She had calibrated the machine's internal mass to match Roy's DNA, so if he stepped into the spindle, the day would reset one final time, and time would return to normal. However, she wasn't entirely certain. This was all theoretical, as it was her first time activating the machine, and everything had been rushed to stop Ventor. If time continued and Roy died, he'd be gone forever. But Roy believed he had enough information to save both Gemma and Joe without much difficulty. After kissing Gemma, Roy stepped into the Osiris spindle, waiting for it to activate, hoping the day would reset one last time. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to see more videos like this. Thank you for watching.